Donald Trump really gunning for a state visit after his working visit the previous year. He wanted those images beamed around the world of him with the Queen in the carriage and the household cavalry.
He really got it, didn't he? Because they rolled out the red carpet.
They do for everyone, though, don't they?
Yeah, but it seemed that he had all sorts of things going on, didn't he? He met Prince of Wales, as was then, and the Queen, and
yes, American presidents don't have the carriage procession. They arrived, do you remember, by helicopter because of security.
Yes.
I mean, when there's a state
and he
visit,
scorched her lawns. I got a great story.
Yes, exactly.
She was absolutely fuming.
So this is the state visit that has been postponed already from spring 2020. Inward state visit from Japan, very important diplomatically. They've waited 4 years for this, and now it looks like it's still to be confirmed because we have a situation where we're preparing for the general election. All royal engagements are subject to change or postponement, but they've waited. They were supposed to come over and meet the Queen, and now they've been told that perhaps they might not be meeting the King. I mean, what's your take on whether that will take place?
My bet is that it will happen, because I think that the negotiations will have been enormous and the planning will have been going on, as you say, for many years. And it's a very important thing. And it's a sort of diplomatic level. I mean, a state visit obviously has a political implication, but theoretically it's above politics. The two heads of state meet and entertain each other, because the king will obviously give a state banquet for the emperor, and the emperor will give a return banquet somewhere, the embassy or at Claridge's or whatever. And that's very important. And this is sort of paving the way for good relations later. And what the late Queen always did, I mean, I always think two things I wanted to call her: Elizabeth the Steadfast or Elizabeth the Conciliator. And conciliation has been always this great message that she had. State visit of President Heuss of Germany in 1958. We cannot change the past, but we can build bridges to the future. Later on, of course, with Ireland and with all these other countries. And Japan, crucially, because of the terrible things that happened in World War II, the most important thing is, and that has been going on obviously for decades, is that we should get to know each other, make friends with each other, and make sure that these things don't happen again. And that is the purpose of a state visit.
It is, and diplomacy is deployed, very widely, but it is political, because state visits happen at the request and the invitation of the government. And once all that sort of, very visual diplomacy is done, the business gets to work government to government. And, the Japanese government will start negotiating and liaising with our government to cut trade deals, to talk about, all sorts of, mutual interests. That's really what those state visits are for. Of course, they're about building bridges diplomatically with our allies around the world and repairing, some previously historically damaged relationships, which we have done with Japan. But, I don't think you can just... I think I suspect you're right, and there'll be a lot of will to make this state visit happen, but there will be some quite interesting wording in the way that it's phrased to make it non-political, because state visits are about politics.
Well, definitely the wording obviously will be crucial, but I think also that, to be quite honest, if I was the cabinet secretary, let's say, or advising there, would make sure that the leader of the opposition had a very good chance to meet the people that come with the emperor, because he may very well be the next prime minister.
So two for the price of one.
So in a sense, they can take that on board. And I mean, invariably anyway, the leader of the opposition does have a chance to meet the incoming state visitor. I mean, they sometimes have a meeting. Obviously, sometimes they go to Downing Street, but there's plenty of opportunity for that. And I'm sure that if everybody is sensitive about that, there's absolutely no reason why the visit can't go ahead, and not only that, be a great success.
We saw that with the inward state visit of South Africa, didn't we? Early on in the reign, where we had the state banquet, but then of course it wasn't just Prime Minister, it was leaders of the opposition as well involved there.
Always involved in that. And, and when, of course, you get a sort of very socialist government sending somebody over, they're going to want to talk to the Labour Party as much as, if not more, than the Conservatives.
I mean, there will be huge disappointment, I would imagine, with Japan if the state visit were to be cancelled, because so many heads of state around the world speak so often about the impact of the state visit. I mean, the pictures, of incoming heads of state in the carriage down the Mall with the sovereign's escort, with the king, and all the pomp of the household cavalry going down to the palace. I mean, the images are huge for whatever.
We put on a fantastic show.
We do, and no one does it better. And I think that'll be very. I remember, Donald Trump really gunning for a state visit after his working visit the previous year. He wanted those images beamed around the world of him with the Queen in the carriage and the household
And he
cavalry.
really got it, didn't he? Because they rolled out the red carpet.
They do for everyone, though, don't they?
Yeah, but he had. It seemed that he had all sorts of things going on, didn't he? He met the Prince of Wales, as was then, and the Queen, and
yes, American presidents don't have the carriage procession, do they? They arrived, do you remember, by helicopter because of security.
Yes.
I mean, when there's a state
and he
visit,
scorched her lawns. I got a great story.
Yes, exactly.
She was absolutely fuming, and there was no denial for Buckingham Palace there, I can assure you.
Well, as you know,
they bring their own kind of armoured car over as well, don't they? The Americans?
Absolutely. And as you know, after the coronation,
but Donald Trump refused to go in the Beast. He would not go in the Beast, like all previous presidents before him who'd come in the car and left in the car. He wouldn't, because he did not want to be driven through the streets of London with protesters, and there were many, many people protesting about him being here. And so he flew in and out of Buckingham Palace 4 times in one day, in and out for the arrival and in and out for the state banquet.
No wonder the garden was all.
And that did not go
up.
down well with Her late Majesty.
Not surprised. Well, that's what happened to George Bush in 2003 when he came over during the Iraq War, and there were protesters in Trafalgar Square, and they toppled a statue of him, a kind of an effigy of him at the time. But there's all this stuff that comes with a state visit.
Going back to King Paul of Greece when he came over, because people didn't like Queen Frederica, there were all sorts of problems and things, and the royal family were booed on their way to, I think, the opera, if not the opera, the theatre in the evening, and they were literally booing from the crowds because she was so unpopular.
The state visits are very big. They're very big.
Yes.
There's a lot of work. They're big set pieces. A lot of work goes into them. I'm just going to read, just to give you an idea of the scale of these events. I'm going to read you something that a magazine described the preparations for the state banquet of the South Korean president recently. Under the chandelier, the ballroom table was set with a grand service. 4,000 pieces, including dinner plates, dessert stands, candelabra made from silver and overlaid with gold. Each place setting was laid with a folded napkin in a Dutch bonnet style. The side plate, 2 knives, 2 forks, a dessert spoon, a fork, and a butter knife. Guests were also given 6 glasses, 1 for water, 2 for wine, another for the dessert course, a port glass, and a toasting glass for champagne. I mean, so much to remember. But actually, what is wonderful about this is that when the state banquet table is laid, royal correspondents and royal reporters, we get to sneak in and we get a tour of it all. And we get to see the state banquet and how it's all been laid out, and we get to see who's sitting next to who.
And the poor people who've been working for days with a ruler to make sure that the cutlery is the exact space apart for each place setting.
And we get...
The detail is incredible.
It is amazing. And we get walked through and we get talked through which seasonal blooms the king has chosen from which of his estates. You know, everything has a meaning on the table. Everything, you know, is just absolutely perfect. And I do always love going to walk through the state banquet tables. It just feels like a real insider's sort of sneak peek. And I love looking at the name places to see who's been put next to who on the naughty table and who's been punished by sitting next to someone they probably don't want to.
But then they also have to have a sort of extra table of people, because occasionally people don't turn up and people have to be popped in at the last minute. You know, the seating plan's always very difficult.
Well, I hope you've got a very good reason for not showing up to the state banquet, because that would be...
Yes.
I'm not sure if there's terrible traffic on the A4 would cut it.
Well, it's interesting you talking about the Roya, when you talk about the kind of the level, the lavishness that goes into these things, because it's a generosity, it's, you know, state to state, and it is all very important. But I think that one of those reasons was probably behind why Charles's first outward state visit was canned, which was to France, because they were having all the riots at the time.
Burning
and
bins.
in the end, Macron said, look, let's just postpone this, because this is not... But also, it's not a very good look if, you know, Macron's sitting there having this lavish banquet, hosting something when people are rioting, the kind of yellow gilets jaunes,
yeah,
rioting
so
because they're not having, you know, they're not getting the wages that they want, and meanwhile Macron's here, you know, hosting a king at great expense.
He pulled it off a few months later at Versailles, and it was hugely lavish.
Yeah, it did.
But again, the optics of that state visit were fantastic.
They were brilliant, weren't they? But then he had to kind of move it. So there's all these sort of political things going on for the other country as well that we perhaps don't appreciate.
I remember looking at the correspondence about the Queen's state visit to France in 1972, in which whether she would be flying in a French aeroplane or a British plane. I mean, it's kind of really complicated. And then, of course, what was the wonderful time when, was it Madame Ceausescu who brought her dog with her, and the dog had to be sent off?
Well, I mean, that's, you know, people talk about, you know, There was such a hoo-ha when President Trump came and everyone going, how can we be hosting President Trump? He's such a divisive leader. But you've got to remember that, the monarch is above politics. And the late Queen had hosted some extremely,
Putin in the carriage.
Ceausescu.
Yes.
Putin.
Putin in the carriage ride with the Queen. I think now that's extraordinary to see those pictures.
Ceausescu to come over.
I mean,
but the Queen did her best to entertain him.
As she she's not there to cast political judgments on other heads of state. And
when Xi Jinping came over and Charles and Camilla did not go to the state banquet, which I thought was interesting. They did meet them separately, but they didn't go to the state banquet. So there's an interesting element to who does what
he boycotted
and who.
the state banquet of a Chinese president, and that went down very badly. And actually, I think he was wrong to do that, because if he had suddenly succeeded to the throne and the government had wanted him to go to China, the Chinese might have wanted him to go, or he might have refused to go.
Well, the king is never going to go to China. I think we can safely say that on a state visit.
I think you're right. But
where his son takes a different view, and his son's view is that he wants to, if we're going to to improve relations, or we want to talk to them about the environment, or and William wants to take the Ascot Prize to China. He's always taken I've always been interested that he's taken such a different stance to his father on China. For what we do know will go ahead, come rain or shine, politics or no politics, are the D-Day celebrations.
Yes, and they have, as you say, commemorated these D-Day landings a lot over the years, and of course, I suppose now nobody left who actually can't really be, can there?
There are far fewer, obviously. Yeah, there is a sort of dwindling band of veterans. There are some left, but yes, this is probably the last year that will, the
last big anniversary where there will be some surviving veterans who can still sort of see what's being done in their honour.
Which is extraordinary and very important to remember this very important anniversary. So they are very good at that sort of thing. Yes, I quite agree with you.
Very soon after D-Day, we're going to have the Garter service, the Garter ceremony. We're going to have Trooping the Colour, and we're going to have, drumroll, Royal Ascot. 3 very big things in the royal calendar that are very important to the royal family, I think.
I would say probably that's the sort of the height of the time where they're most prominently seen in a kind of spectacular and also to some extent social way, aren't they? Because Ascot is a very social event. The one time when the late Queen was, there, but she was actually enjoying the racing, and so she wasn't. So she was there in a sense officially, and yet she was also there as a private person, so she could decide if she wanted to go down to the paddock. And the olden days when the paddock was a long way away, she would just sort of, with her umbrella, just point in one way, and then the crowd would just disperse, and she would just go through, and then she would be looking at the horses because she loved all that, and then come back again, and people were very close to her if they were in the royal enclosure.
Some of my favourite photographs of the Queen when she's watching the racing, because any sense of the kind of wearing the mask or the crown kind of has lost, and it's just that kind of the passion kind of comes out.
She did always look her happiest around horses.
Well, she did. And what about the Derby?
Just like
I suppose the Derby
woman
must
after my own heart. An interesting thing about Ascot, I mean, it's something that the royal family absolutely love. They turn out. It's always a huge family turnout, and we've been told that the King and the Queen will be at Ascot as much as they possibly can this year. They went every single day last year, which nobody expected the King to go every day because no one knew he was into racing, and he wasn't really. Camilla is, but then he had a winner and he got very into racing. But I've always sort of thought, and I'm a big racing enthusiast, and I love racing and horses. Do you think when the public can man on the street, women on the street, see them in Ascot and all their finery and, top hats and tails and all of that, do you think it makes them seem a little bit more removed, a little bit, I know it's the royal family, it's ridiculous to say elitist, but even more removed from
I can remember
reality.
A discussion way back must have been in the 1990s as to whether they should cancel the Ascot procession. And whether that was too elitist.
And the Ascot procession is when they're in the carriages coming down the racetrack.
Of course, which is a wonderful sight as they shimmer in the distance, and suddenly they come and they get closer and closer and closer. And I remember saying at the time, for heaven's sake, the monarch must appeal to all elements of society. And actually, like you, an enormous number of people like racing. It doesn't really matter what they're wearing. They like the racing. So there are not only the royal enclosure, but on the other side of the track is the heath, where anyone can go and enjoy it. And I think it's fantastic. And I think it should be encouraged, and it's the king taking part in a sport which people love. Quite right.
That's really interesting that at that time, I suppose, coming out of the 80s, people were looking at how does that,
sort of
what is the image of the
Yes.
royal family, and is it too, is it too elitist? Is it kind of...
Well, I've always thought, there was a little bit of a time when they had the Queen signing footballs and things, and I thought, well, that's all fine, as long as every now and again she puts on her crown and goes to the state opening of Parliament. I think she can do, and the King also, they can do both, and they must do both. It's important to put on the crown every now and again so that you remember who he is. And of course, as far as Parliament is concerned, and after the general election, obviously there will be a state opening of Parliament. That is the one time when the monarch goes to Westminster in state and reminds us of his part in the Constitution, because you've got the elected House of Commons, you've got the House of Lords, and you've got the monarch, and nothing becomes an act of Parliament until it's gone through those three processes. The King signs it at the last minute. He will sign it, of course, but a lot of people see it on the way. So he's the stopgap in the Constitution. And I think that of all the things that the monarch says at the state opening of Parliament, actually the speech is written, as you know, by the Prime Minister. It's the last words when he just wishes God's blessing on your discussions, or however it's put. That is really the important thing. And then he goes and lets them get on with it.
The other thing about Royal Ascot is it's, a great family occasion for the royal family. You see all of them come together very often in the paddock, and they're there in the royal enclosure, in the royal box. The Tyndalls are often there. The Princess Royal often comes. Beatrice and Eugenie often come. Even William comes, and he is really not into racing, and that's what will happen to Royal Ascot.
So just one day, doesn't it? And that's pretty much what you get from William.
Yeah, horse racing is not his thing, but they do all turn out for it, and they seem to really enjoy sort of coming together and seeing each other.
And it's a big house party, of course, back at Windsor Castle. Yes. They start off with a lunch, and then they drive down and they get into the carriages, and then they come along, and there's lots of other activities going on as well.
So there's a jollity around it. It's not just what we see on in the carriages. It's more significant than that. It's a kind of an opportunity for the members of the royal family to get together as a family before they then go their separate ways for their big summer break.
Yes, I suppose that after Ascot, which is the usually sort of second week of June, there'll be usually a few garden parties, aren't there, still going on? And I don't know whether they do the Holyrood House week, do they?
Well, Holyrood House will be, again, I'm sure, Holyrood week will be in the balance.
Well, that'll be right just before or just after the election.
It would have been first week of July, I think.
It usually is around, but that probably it might well not happen, actually. And then, of course, as you rightly say, they have the chance to go off on their holidays and relax a little bit up to a point.
I suppose one of the benefits of the election being now is because everyone had been talking about an autumn election. And whether a kind of early November election would put paid to plans for the King to go to Australia and Samoa for the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. So at least, even though it's kind of thrown a spanner in the works now, it's probably saved a bit of grief, further down the line.
It's going to be grief somewhere, isn't it?
Well,
yes,
quite.
It's true.
Hugo, apparently you've got a good joke about the Garter.
Well, it was always said
that sounds a bit saucy, doesn't it?
The Garter ceremony, which takes place on the Monday, so you've got the Trooping the Colour on Saturday, and then the Garter ceremony, at which this year the Duchess of Gloucester is going to be installed as a Lady of the Garter, which is most unusual. Huge support, as you probably know, to Queen Camilla. The Gloucesters have sort of come out of the wings after over 52 years and really being supportive and doing everything, and obviously very well trained for it. And so the gift of the Garter to her is highly significant. But it was always said that the Garter ceremony was known as the Ascot Vigil, when the knights would kneel to pray for a winner later in the week.
And were they ever successful? Was anyone keeping tabs?
Well, last year they were successful, weren't they, I suppose?
I think the Duke of Norfolk of his day was quite successful. I remember him winning the Gold Cup once, yes. The Duke who did the coronation, that Duke.
Regardless of what happens with the election, it looks like it's still going to be quite a busy June, few weeks for the royal family. So thank you, Hugo, for bringing your extraordinary expertise, historical knowledge and jokes about garters to the royals with Roya and Kate. It's been a pleasure having you on.
It's been lovely.
Nice to have the opportunity to tell them.